If you ever consider taking the B-level parts of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise and mixing them in and mashing them with the B-level parts of the Indiana Jones franchise, you'd end up with Jungle Cruise. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead and like, share, subscribe to the channel. Ring that bell below. Anytime you have something, you will be among the first to know. Another of the long delayed, often delayed films in the ever moving 2020 to 2021 slate due to the COVID and the pandemic. This one's interesting. It's another one of those Disney release in the theaters, release in the on Disney Plus under Premier Access at the same time. As we have seen in the recent news with Scarlett Johansson, I'm not sure how much the stars appreciate that because there are a lot of kickers and bonuses and kickbacks that happen when you get to a certain threshold with box office numbers that aren't quite equated to in contracts when you start putting in streaming numbers. So there's sort of a loophole where these folks are losing the money that they normally would get. And there isn't a person that screams box office more than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson right now. So it's going to be interesting to look at the box office of all of this to see where this lands, to see if he falls into that same category. Like, hey, you guys are screwing me out of pay. But that's a whole different conversation. The movie itself, I actually had a fun time with this movie. It is not original. You know what you're getting into. You know what you're. It's just one of those swashbuckling roller coaster ride adventure films, much in the line of Pirates of the Caribbean, where the characters, the lead male and the lead female, probably aren't going to like each other, but by the end of it, chemistry ensues, and after dealing with death-defying situations time and time again, they end up closer than they ever could have possibly imagined themselves to be in the first place. This doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it is a lot of fun having it. And what makes this work, where this all could fall apart because the story's been there before. You're dealing with like all kinds of random stuff and one upping of what you think it's going to be. But the chemistry works. Like the chemistry between Frank, Dwayne Johnson, and Lily, played by Emily Blunt, it works. They have a lot of chemistry together. They have a lot of chemistry solo, and they have a lot of chemistry together. And I think that just makes the ride, you're in, once you get invested in them, and I think that's going to be whether or not you like this movie, is if you're invested in them, you're off to the races. If you're not, you're going to be like, oh, then I don't really care because I've seen this done probably somewhat better in different situations. But I think the chemistry here works really well and makes this film just a fun ride to take part in. There are a lot of good comedy. I think one of the biggest things with these Disney ride movies or these haunted mansions and stuff like that is that, like, what do they take from the actual ride that sort of makes this justify using the imprint or the branding of Jungle Cruise? And I think the biggest thing is you have sort of this. If anyone's ever done the Disneyland Jungle Cruises or Disney World Jungle Cruises, I don't know if it's at Disney World, but at Disneyland it is. You always will have a captain or a skipper or a person who's taking you on the tour who is, they're doing these super corny and just like, oh, rolling your eyes in the back of your head type of jokes. And that's a big shtick or part of what Frank does in this movie. And it sort of leads to a one-to-one with what that is. And it's like, oh yeah, that is what the Jungle Cruise is. And it sort of feels like that, and these fake things popping out of nowhere. So you get the essence of that. The villains in here work, some better than others. I'm more in line with the human villains. I think this movie starts getting into being very supernatural, and there's some twists that I won't give away, but it starts getting into points where it's just kind of like, I don't think I needed as much CGI as you're possibly putting in front of the screen because it gets overwhelming. And I was like, I think I would have just preferred it. You kept giving me all the tangible stuff. I was having a good time with all the tangible stuff before we started getting to like CGI snakes and CGI this and CGI that. And for a movie that has been in the can for as long as it has, some of the CGI, especially when we get to the dark sequences, sticks out a lot more than some of the stuff that was a lot more tactical and realistic. It didn't really take away from the movie because by that point in time, by the time that you start getting to the heavy CGI stuff, I'm already invested. I'm already in. But if there's anything that could pull you out, it could be that. The only thing that I had a bit of an issue with, and I don't know where else you would put it, is there's a pretty large exposition dump about 3/4 of the way into the film. and it slows the film down to just drag. It's a huge point, like, oh god, can we get back to the fun stuff? Um, and there's a lot of backstory that's filled in there. It has to be done because this movie would have a lot of questions, a lot of things that's like, it just doesn't make sense, and you really don't want to start off a film like this with an exposition dump. But it takes you out of it's like, oh, we're full speed ahead, full speed ahead, full speed, and you just come into a brick wall. And then you're like, when do we get back there? And the final act, the final piece of this does sort of pick back up, but you could lose a lot of people off that train. And if I had not enjoyed all the stuff that I got up to that point, I probably would have been like, how much longer do we have here? So all in all, on my scale of once is enough, play it again, Sam, or give me a time stone, so I never have to think about this film again. This is play it again, Sam. I had fun with this. This is very entertaining. Another one of those. The Rock is a charismatic dude, and Emily Blunt is just having a ball, and she's also really charismatic. And I can just watch the two of them. Even if you don't want to go see this film, just watch some of them doing their press run. It's clear that they enjoy each other and have a good rapport. I would sort of liken the two of them to do another film, whether it's Jungle Cruise 2 or whatever, to do another film, sort of like he has the rapport with Kevin Hart, because there's a lot there on the table that I would love to see them to do that again. But did you guys see Jungle Cruise? What did you guys think? Go ahead and leave your comments and thoughts in the comments below. I'm interested to see what the box office for this is, because the theaters was not empty, and I know there's some parts of the country that because of the Delta variant, they are putting mask mandates back on, so some people aren't vaccinated and they're not going to the theater. Some people are like, I'm not going back to the theater if I got to wear a mask. So you're having a bit of a tenfold. And this theater that I went to tonight on a Friday night was not full. So I'm curious to see what the box office. I think this is probably going to be around the $25 to $30 million range. But I think had things been normal, and this would have been a draw of about at least 55 to 65. But we'll see what the Disney premiere numbers, so even though they never released those, we'll see what those do to sort of balance it all out. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast by the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. But like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.